For more, Danielle Diceroth, lead climate strategist at Data for Progress, joins us now. A good day to you, Danielle. As we just heard, the impact of climate change can be seen in Americans' backyards. We're talking heat waves, floods, droughts, but it wasn't really at the forefront of campaigning. How much is climate really on the minds of voters heading into these midterms?
That's a great point. And climate change is certainly in the back of folks' minds, but it's not the number one issue that's driving them to the ballot box in the U.S. this election cycle. What is driving them to vote this cycle is inflation, energy prices, crime and public safety, abortion. So we're seeing a lot of these other issues really eclipse climate change in importance. But that's not to say that climate isn't woven into so many of these issues that matter to people, like energy prices, for example. Our reliance on expensive fossil fuels that depend on a very complex global market is very much linked to climate change. So while, if you ask people exactly what they're voting for, climate change might not be the first word that comes to mind. It's definitely lumped in there as well.
Now, the Democrats, and more specifically the progressive left of the party, have been pushing hardest when it comes to climate policy. Would more Republicans coming into office mean a backward step in climate legislation?
That's really hard to say right now. I think certainly if you look at younger Republicans, take, for example, the mayor of Miami in Florida. I mean, he is one of the leading Republicans saying that, hey, we have to act on climate change because Miami is a city that is impacted, of course, by rising sea levels and extreme weather events like hurricanes. So I think we're seeing younger generations of Republicans increasingly recognizing that climate is something that they will have to reckon with during their time in office. That being said, I don't think that they'll be calling it climate action. I think they'll be calling it things like flood resilience or, improving our infrastructure. The words climate change can be very polarizing depending on what side of the political spectrum that you fall on. So it's, it is hard to say right now whether, should Republicans win control of Congress on Tuesday, if they'll take such drastic actions as repealing some of the measures that the Biden administration put in place to address the climate crisis. But I'm not so certain that will happen in the immediate future.
Is that the same as well? If we see a strong Republican showing and have some leaders who are against climate policy, what message would that send to the private sector and other nations who are watching America, who are considering investing in climate tech in the U.S.?
It would be very discouraging. It would be an enormous disappointment to see the U.S. backslide on all of the progress that we just have made, especially with the historic passage of the Inflation Reduction Act earlier this fall, which saw the largest U.S. public investment in clean energy in history. So certainly other nations are looking to the U.S. to set an example and to set a strong example of investing in clean energy and reducing harmful emissions. And certainly it would be very upsetting to especially so many folks in the climate movement, the progressive left, as you mentioned, who have really worked for their entire careers to pass this bill. I can't even describe how much of a disappointment it would be to see that progress erased under a new Congress.
Danielle, these midterms are happening right at the start of the COP27 climate summit in Egypt. We'll get an instant reaction from world leaders and climate experts to the midterms, won't we? And how do you think it could play out at the talks?
Well, I think, many are calling this COP the African COP. As you mentioned, U.S. investment in clean energy, not just at home, but also abroad, I think is something a lot of leaders at COP are looking toward. So, thinking about how much money the U.S. is able to commit to developing nations to increase their share of clean energy, to help deploy clean energy technologies, that's certainly something a lot of leaders at COP are looking toward. And that will be certainly very up in the air, depending on the results of Tuesday's midterm elections.
We're running out of time, but quickly, your thoughts. Climate change policy has been woven into the Democrats' Inflation Reduction Act, you named that earlier, as well as infrastructure bills. And it seems like climate is now very much a part of many other policies. Are we seeing a paradigm shift here? Is it no longer just the economy versus the environment?
Absolutely. You know, climate change has gone from sort of a fringe issue in the Democratic Party just a decade ago to now a central tenet of so many leading Democratic candidates' campaigns, even in really tough elections, like in states like Pennsylvania and Ohio. So moving forward, the climate crisis is here. We can't avoid confronting the realities of climate change, whether that's, how we're powering our cars, our homes, how our infrastructure responds to climate-driven weather events. So moving forward, climate change is something that we will have to address in so many different policy areas that we previously didn't before, regardless of who's in charge in Congress.
Yes, and having said that, as the world's biggest economy and one of the biggest polluters, how important is it for the U.S. to lead on climate change issues?
It's enormously important for the U.S. to be signaling to the rest of the world that we are willing to take the steps to reduce our emissions. The U.S. is one of the world's largest emitters. So by us making a commitment to address things at home and make commitments to countries abroad, that is, it's hard to put into words how much that matters. And we really can't afford to waste any more time delaying our rapid deployment of clean energy technologies to address climate change. So any sort of backsliding in U.S. climate policy is time that we've already lost and we can't get back. So it is of paramount importance that U.S. leaders continue, regardless of what happens in the midterms, the Biden administration can issue many executive actions to continue their very strong record on climate action, even without Congress.
Danielle, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much for your insights today. That was Danielle Dyserath, lead climate strategist at Data for Progress.